Since we are now taping 3 times a week, I want to note again for you people here in town and out of town that there is a purpose to this. And it's not simply that I have now an extra night since the bowling season's over. There is a purpose to this. And now that I am offering you more, you must assume, or I'm telling you, that I expect more. I expect more effort, and I expect you to feed whatever need you have more directly. And you people out of town, I'm going to have to leave it to you as always to arrange whatever you're going to do about how to handle 3 tapes a week. I'll pause here for a second so that you don't have to show that to the public. A real revolutionist does not simply or merely forget everything, since I've been talking about that on and off for a long time. It's not that he forgets everything. I talk about that some nights on taping, and we've sat around sometimes semi-socially, and I've made jokes that I don't remember anything I've ever done. And I've said that to a few of you people that's been around for a while, and even under semi-social conditions, I've seen some of you go, like, you know, it does not seem to fit with everybody's idea of some great spiritual whatever, that for me to say, I don't remember anything. And what's your name? Or how long have I known you? Or how long have I been in this city? It's not that. It's not that doing this that you end up with a new kind of nervous system such that you have simply forgotten everything. That's not it. But what I am inferring that you will discover is that what a real revolutionist does remember is only that which serves his purpose, which serves him and serves his growth. All right, having said that, let me expand a little bit on it. The kind of information that would be serving this kind of revolutionary purpose, the revolutionist, the person involved with this, retrieves it in a certain way. He retrieves it through a kind of extraordinary memory that is personally benign. Since I've already pointed out that really in the 3D city sense there is no such thing as a benign medium. But in this sense, the revolutionist is almost benign. Or let me put it the other way that I already have. It is personally benign, the medium that he uses to retrieve this information. That is, whatever the information is that he is going to use, that he may can use, maybe serving his purpose. Whatever, if there were any, whatever personal feelings he had regarding, entangled with this information, he has now abandoned. And so that him being able to remember it, it is personally the medium through which he remembers it. The way he is able to remember it and use it is now personally benign. And this certainly would not exclude what would have been, what was, at ordinary level back when it occurred, very emotional, very traumatic, very passionate interludes, which are the best fuel to learn from. Have you noticed how ordinary humanity loves this alliteration of forgive and forget? They must love it. You hear it all the goddamn time. And they love it and repeat it even while admitting that they can't do it. It's no secret. But consider this from a strange way. From a different way. Ordinary people were out to push them a little bit about this matter, about forgive and forget. And get a person to get fairly, at least intellectually, serious with the idea. And I talked to them. Ordinary people might say this, very likely, that the whole concept of forgive and forget is like this, that they could forgive if they could simply forget. That is, I could forgive what's been done to me if I could quit thinking about it, right? While a real revolutionist would see it another way. That the only way, not the only, but I'll put it that way, one way that I am able to forgive is through the ability to remember it. That is, to be able to think about it and stop it there before I relive the emotional aspect of it. This is getting better if you're following it, because it's better than just reversing it and turning it inside out. It's turning it inside out, then with a little English on it. As you reach inside, as you reach down its throat and grab it by the at the base of its nervous system. So you thought I was going to say asshole. Well, as you grab it and you pull it inside out, but this time, while pulling it inside out, you give it this. Must I repeat it? That ordinary people, talk to your own ordinary people. Would they not say, if I question them in such a way, that forgive and forget is not an easy matter? It sounds right, it feels good, I love to say it, has a certain sound to it in English. And I admit I can't do it. I remember all these debts that's been owed me, all these bruises that I've suffered at the hands of other people, and I've tried to forgive certain people. And I believe, as far as the forgive and forget idea, that there would be a much more distinct possibility. In fact, I almost believe I could forgive people if I could forget it, forget them. But by God, something will bring it up. Somebody will say, your Uncle Charlie's coming, and as soon as I think about him, then I think about the time he cheated me, and I can't forgive him. If I could forget him, I could forgive him. But just look what I was talking about last time, if you don't see the connection yet. A revolutionist, not the only way, although I put it that way to get your attention, I guess. I don't guess. But one way to look at it is the ability, and this is not even astronomical in its implications. This is just approaching 4D consciousness. That one of the ways in which I could describe that it's possible to actually forgive people is not over crying that I wish I could forget about them, not I could forgive them. It's the ability that I can remember them. I can yellow circuit them, I can think about them, and I can stop that particular line in me there, and then I can, in a sense, forgive them. That is, not feel about them anymore. Do you follow me? That the thing is, through my ability to actually think about them, is how I can keep from feeling about them. All right, that, and people continue to ask me questions when I've tried to describe, and you got your own lab. And any of you who thinks that this is far away from you, it is not. The lab's not far away, and the reality I was going to try to push you up to again about seeing how the circuits operate. And one of them I was going to use, I got somebody to bring me a book, and I've tried to describe this before. I've described to you the time lag, I've described to you in ways like playing a phonograph record, that there's what amounts to an inverted echo, that you put down the stylus, and before it actually starts playing, you can hear the bleed over. You can hear the sound of the record, if you put your ear down, before it actually comes through the full audio chain. You can hear it being picked up right there at the head, at the stylus. The big part on your turntable's tone arm. There's something else. I assume this will pick up. In a sense, ordinary consciousness, if everybody knows what these are, it's like a pop-up book. Everybody remembers those. I've managed to get somebody to bring one tonight. It's like this. I'm still talking about the forgive and forget. You got an uncle, you got a mother, you got an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, somebody that just, every time you remember them, every time their name comes up, every time you see a picture that looks like him or her, so the whole little thing goes on again. Out in the city, it doesn't matter. They think it matters, they talk about it, they go to psychiatrists, it doesn't matter. On the contrary, if I must point it out, it does matter. They're supposed to be that way. And it's plus they're supposed to think that they shouldn't be that way. But as far as a person living out their life and fulfilling the proper transfer of energy for life, it doesn't matter. They say that they're hurt, they say that they're brokenhearted, and they're not. Oh, all right, they are. In a sense, consciousness, though, is like a pop-up book. And people don't think about it this way. Now, I was going to put it to you another way. All right, you can know This is the part that, in the alliteration of forgive and forget, this is the forget part, turned inside out with a twist, being able to remember that so-and-so, Miss so-and-so or Mr. X so-and-so, somebody that hurt you, some old boyfriend or girlfriend, or your mother, your father. It's like you remember that in the past, when I think about them, it's right over there on that page, that kind of hostile feeling pops up. I know it's there. I've always seen it. I've seen it hundreds of times. I just show it to you people 3 times, but I know it's there. I know it's there, but if I don't do that, I don't feel it. But that doesn't mean that I cannot think about it. That doesn't mean that even the thoughts, when I say think about it, I don't mean to willfully sit down and try and think of something. I mean when the thought just comes upon me, which, with all of you people, is the only way you think. I didn't want to get into that tonight, but there it is. In the city, that's the only way people think. It just comes upon them. But it comes upon you, somebody says, hey, that girl you used to go with, what was her name? Miss X? I saw her today. As soon as it happens, we're not talking about ordinary people now, we're talking about what you can do and the way that you should see that you can do it. You know where the Miss X page is, that whole episode in your life and how he or she hurt you, that it's right there, and all you got to do is do that, and it pops up. It does every time you know it, and you know it's there. But by knowing it's there, and find out what I'm talking about, that is not metaphysical and it's not weird, it's just unnatural. You simply do not do that. And by being able to remember it and know what this will do, if you let go any further, you stop that line of energy in you, and it's not the thing about, well, I could forgive if I could forget the person. No, no, no. It's inside out and then with a little spin on it. By the very fact that I can think about something and I can separate it. I can separate in time. You only got a second, but you can do it. That I know it's there and I won't open it. If you do not make some willful effort, if you do not know that this is a material, a physical, a molecular fact, then as always, I don't have to predict it, you know it. If you know anything, that, all right, I hear so-and-so, did you say so-and-so? And they said, yeah, and you go. There's no choice about it. You can then later think, I've got to stop this, I'm not going to do it anymore. But if you knew anything, if you had any concept of what seems to be linear time in the city, you would know that as soon as they said, hey, I saw an old girlfriend of yours, old X. You know within 1 second you're going to hear X, and you're going to open the book. That damn bitch. That sorry bastard. The very fact of being able to remember something that initially, and still through memory, but initially was, what do they call it in the city? Unpleasant. That I have been danced against, I have been danced on. The very fact of being able to remember that, and now have a almost benign, a personally benign recollection of it, the very fact that I can remember it, in me can ground it out. That, yeah, I remember it. You know, of course, you don't tell people all this, and you don't have to anymore. When they says, hey, I saw so-and-so, that guy, that girl you used to go with. By you being able to remember, not only that, of course, because everybody naturally, mechanically does that, but you remember that right there, just at all times. I got the book with me. And of course, for people, I just picked out the one that popped up the best, I thought, visually. But your book's full of little pop-ups, right? You know, there are other pages and other little pop-ups. But this one, you know right where it is. And if it runs its natural course, it's going into your ears, in the yellow circuit. Hey, I saw so-and-so to that girl, that guy I used to go with. And you got 1 second, and you open the book. But if you know how to do it, the very fact of being able to think about an emotionally unpleasant, a blue circuit unpleasantness, you can ground it out then and stop it. You are then using a non-native to man, presently, a non-native, personally benign medium of memory, and using it. That there you are, you're thinking about such and such situation, a such and such person. You can think about them, but by doing so you find out, I can stop it there and thus not feel about them. And that's it. I read, only today, or it could have been 1974, I can't remember, this. It said, it takes two to speak the truth. One to actually say it, and another to hear it. Again, could I point out to you the catastrophic difference between this and them? Between this and life. Because that was not written as a joke. It was either a book of famous philosophical quotes or it was on the back of a cereal box. I can't remember. But it was presented seriously. And although some of you already chuckled when I said it because you just knew I was going to do something with it, it still has yellow circuit validity in the city. That it takes two to speak the truth. You got to have two people for the truth in some way to be spoken, to be discovered, to be realized. The person, let's say you, is actually going to speak it, and then another person to hear it. Right? There's validity to that in the city. How about out in the bushes? Who can understand that ultimately, in a certain way, that you cannot gain the throne unless you can go it alone? I don't even think I'll write that down. It seems like I stole that from somebody. It was on the back of a cereal box, so I assume the copyrights run out. Because I remember the cereal was at least 52 years old. What I was threatening to say, what they mean by the truth, new data, data that is not personally malignant, data that you have not thought before to some degree, new information, something that has the ability to feed a part of your nervous system that's never been fed, food that is superfluous, in fact, your nervous system as it is. The very kind of information that we're dealing with here, the closed caption part going on invisibly above my head as we stand here and talk now 3 nights a week. In that realm, it does not take two people. But the original quote, even though the quoter did not by any means mean this, when they said it takes two people to speak the truth, one to speak it and one to hear it, they didn't mean this, but I can point out to you that that's even true before it gets to that level back in the city, that ordinary people speak the truth to themselves. Like, oh, I just had a great idea, say you to yourself. Or you hear on TV that the president said so-and-so. And you say, well, you dumb son of a bitch, what you should do is this. You just spoke the truth to you. What you should do is go in there and just raid that country and bomb them to hell. Huh. You just spoke the truth. But you had to speak it, and you said it when, reach for another beer. You said, It's like, I put a period on it, I finished this. That ignorant bastard, why do we elect people like that? Whatever it is. You spoke the truth. You heard the truth. What else is a good partnership for? And it takes two to do that. Now, the original quote still has real validity because the majority of the time, many times in the city, the lines running through humans, making them apparently speak the truth to themselves. Some new discovery, some comment, some criticism of life. Well-deserved, of course. When it reaches a certain intensity, when life needs it to a certain degree, it's not enough that you said it. You want to remember it. Or maybe you said it while your girlfriend or boyfriend or just somebody you know was in the bathroom. They came back in. You say, hey, could you hear and hear this talking about that the president's decided that now he's going to let that damn dictator stay in such and such country? And the guy, your friend, says, well, yeah, I knew part of that. Well, I was just thinking what they ought to do is just go in there and bomb those bastards. You know, the Alabama State Patrol could tear up their whole army. What the hell are we waiting on? And your friend goes, we got more beer? But it was like he heard it and went, hey, or maybe he punched you and said, yeah, you're right. Boy, send them Alabama troopers. They'll beat the shit out of those foreigners. It did not seem that it had actually been said, that the truth had not been spoke, not bespoke, until there were two people involved. At one level, two people in here, that you say it and you hear it. You accept it. It's like the partnership. Smith and Jones after hours, and Smith makes some comment, and Jones goes, yeah. So inside you take it. You listen to you apparently talk, but then as I said, as you should know from your own experience, it's not any kind of theory. It's constantly what seems to be so much of this surplus. From one view, irrelevant talk is people saying things to somebody else, and nobody seems to be all that interested, but somebody makes what sounds to be a proclamation from the top of a mountain, da-da-da-da-da, and what are friends for? That the other person goes, hey, all right. But then it seems to have satisfied at least the first person, the speaker. Back to doing this. The catastrophic, the bone-shaking, the bone-rattling difference between doing this and out in life, if there is any kind of truth. And of course I keep picking on that word because in the city it means it's a flawed piece of a larger area that I have of late been comparing to the correct instead of the true. But go back to their terms about if the truth is to be spoken, it requires two people. What they think they mean the city by the truth. If you're going to deal with this, that is, you see something anew, by all means, don't tell anybody. By all means, don't tell the unwashed masses in you. By all means, don't tell your own partner. Do not tell yourself what you saw. And by all means squared, don't go get some other human, some other collection of molecules, and tell them. Many of you, I know, have already been through that in your own way and tried to tell somebody something and you got through. Or maybe before you got through the sentence and you suddenly felt, ugh, and you realized you had done something naughty. You wished that you could reverse the film just back a few seconds, that you had never opened your mouth. It had cost you. You were doing as you should in the city, but it does not take two out in the bushes, out in the sylvan areas. It does not take two to speak the truth. Contraire, contraire. And I wish I'll dig up some more synonyms for no, no, no. You cannot. Let me make up another phrase that they could use in the city. Well, no. Listen quick. This is getting sticky. I'm going to take the kind of thing they'd say in the city, and I'm going to real quick turn it sort of sideways into our kind of use. Is that clear enough? All right, I was going to use the terms something being worth something. So when I catch you in the middle of a sentence, I'm going to change swimming pools and metaphors and directions, and I'm going to turn a corner. But I'm going to start off in the city. People think that certain things are worth something, of value, profitable, serious, right? All right. So it's a combination I was going to put together based upon what they would say in the city, the way they'd use the term worth. Are you ready? Is that clear enough? Does anybody ever notice that some of my prefaces are more astounding and more confusing? No. It's your imagination. All right, here it is. In the city, anything worth discussing is worth destroying or abandoning. All right, semicolon, or colon if you want that way. All right, anything worth remembering is worth forgetting. Now you see why I tried to give you a preface, because I'm not speaking just for the city, I'm not speaking just from the bushy areas, I put them both together. If it seems to be worth remembering, part one, it's worth forgetting. If it seems to be worth discussing, and by worth I mean the full ramification that people, there's just no choice. That, come here dear, sit down, we have got to discuss this matter. It's gone too far with your sexual partner, with your family, with your children. Listen, we have got to discuss this. And it's just obvious. There you are in the city, there's no doubt. We've got to sit down. We've got to. Out in the bushes though, if it's worth discussing, it's worth abandoning at the very least. And of course, one of the more immediate possibilities, it's worth destroying. Just If it's worth discussing, it is definitely worth either destroying or abandoning. And if it's worth remembering, that is, in the city, you've got to remember things. You've got to remind your children. Do you remember what I told you? You got to remind your parents. You remember what you did to me when I was just a teenager? You got to tell all your sexual partners now and those that left you that you just heard about. You actually saw her. She's in town. Let me go find her so I can say, hey, you remember what you did to me just before you left, don't you? And she says, you know, that was 12 years ago. Yeah, but you remember? If it's worth remembering in the city sense, whatever it is, and of course the city sense, you carry it with you. Anything in you that's worth remembering, it's worth forgetting. Case closed. At least sentence ended. That's it. It's proof. If you're malignant, that is, you're non-benign medium of memory, the things that just come upon you and they go from the blue into the yellow circuits back and forth. You think about it and you feel about it. You can't forgive and you can't forget. If it was worth that, which in the city all memories are worth that, right? Right. If it was worth that, then out in the bushes, immediately. You don't have to investigate, well, what's all the dynamics? Who are all the people involved? That doesn't matter. If it was worth remembering, trust me, it's worth forgetting. That is, if you remember it, forget it. That's it. At least forget it until you can remember it without feeling about it. And if you remember it without feeling about it, of course, you will not discuss it. What the hell is to discuss? If you don't feel one way or the other about something, then you're getting close to what would be real, as they call it in the city, intellectual information. Real yellow circuit data. This stuff I can remember and use, and I got no personal feeling about it. I don't care how it comes out. I don't care what it proves. Of course you do, because you're serving your own growth interest. But based upon the views of the mediums of memory in the city, you don't care. Well, you gotta care. Look what she did to you, the way she treated you. Look how he did you. Of course, I could be funny and say that if there was any kind of response internally to a revolution, it would be, well, hey, you're the one saying it. You think about it for me. You remember it. You feel it. I don't know what to tell you to do with that. I was just moved to put that in. The thing is, the revolutionists would understand that if, under all circumstance, ordinary circumstance, it just comes upon me, the thoughts, the feelings, memory. If it's worth that, that is, if it's worth remembering, it's worth forgetting. You don't have to go into details. If I automatically remember it, I shouldn't be. That is not a personally benign retrieval. And it is never useful. You can't control it. There's another part of things that go on in the city that I was going to give you a... Shall I make up a term that the definition would be quotes I made up? Or is that getting too complicated? Quotes I made up, but then need a word that means that I make up. Quotes I made up. Well, never mind. Of course, I just made that up, see, so you're 3 behind. I didn't actually say that, I just made it up. In the city, still in the city sense, things that are remembered and discussed are only, they're always and only things unfinished. That's it. What else is discussed in the city? Good. Things unfinished, he said. What is remembered in the city? Not only amongst people, but amongst you. What? That's correct. Things unfinished, that's it. Does anybody remember that which is completed? Does anybody discuss that which is completed? That's sort of interesting now that I thought of it, isn't it? All right, if only things are discussed and remembered that are unfinished, what might you think about yourselves? Using yourselves as being indicative, exemplary of humanity. What do people talk about? Well, obviously in the city, they only talk about those things that have some value themselves. I repeat, in the city sense, the only things that are discussed and remembered are things unfinished. That's simply a fact. I'll give you a few seconds if I got to. It'll have to hit you. But that's a fact. Things finished, you don't think about. You don't remember. And you certainly don't discuss them. How about a corollary to that? Nothing is truly finished until you feel that it is. And a real revolutionist always and never feels that way. Nothing is truly finished until you feel that it is. And a real revolutionist never and always feels that way. Drug in from night before last. I assume that you can see that I could plug in the word perfected for finished. And then let me ask you this. What if you finished? What if you perfected your own partnership? What if, that is, you finished what seems to be you and everybody else in the city, that I am lacking? I got bad habits, whatever you call it. I'm not a good Jew, I'm not a good Christian, I'm not a good mother, I'm not a good father, I'm not a good child, I'm not a good Republican. What if you could finish the job? Is your systems, is your own molecular noise inside seems to drive you to feel and to think that you should be? What if you finished you as a piece of business? Then what? Would you, as I was pointing out night before last, would you then disappear? If I must refresh your memory, I point out that if, although people continue to talk about the need for perfection, no human has ever said, even the most poetic, even the most poetically inclined while under the influence of the vino, has never said, I have seen perfection. Well, I know some of the poets that got drunk and real horny and would look at some woman and holler, you know, she's getting awfully close. But we all take that into account, and that notwithstanding, is that humans just admit they have never seen perfection. And of course, from there, along some of life's energy lines, it's just one step from that to the concept of God and religion and an afterlife, and we don't know what the hell is going on. We never will know. It is simply that no one has ever seen perfection. And you recall I was pointing out to you the possibility, if you took it as being a possibility, that the reason they had never seen perfection, if indeed it has ever occurred, that if things did get perfected, they would turn the corner and they would go, they would disappear if they got perfected by the 3D, by the city definition and their understanding of it, their ordinary understanding. So now I'm asking you, in other words, the perfection would be the finishing of something. But now I'm asking you about you. What if you got finished? What if a person was able to be perfected? Would you be exempt from what I was pointing out night before last? And if so, who the hell do you think you are? Why do you think you're exempt? How do you know that you would not turn the corner? How is it that no one sees perfection? Now, I didn't make it that personal night before last. But if indeed, as I was suggesting to you, should I just go ahead and say it? You ought to have some hint of it. That if from the 3D sense things became perfected, situation, people, that somebody sees and talks about, this is imperfect and it could be perfected. If it did get perfected by their understanding of it, as life gives it at the 3D level, if it did get perfected, it would disappear. Not the people, physically. Not the situation itself, which the situation's always a bunch of people, one way or the other. And then some stuff that people did and made. Not good services. It's not that the things would disappear, but the consciousness of this thing was imperfect. This thing was unfinished. That whole so-called awareness, that whole concept would be gone. Disappeared. If it became perfected, if it got finished, it disappears from consciousness, from 3D consciousness. Now I'm asking you, why would you think that a person would be exempt from that? What if you finished out the partnership? What if you perfected little old you? Are you sure you wouldn't disappear? I didn't say physically. Are you sure you wouldn't disappear? And to think after all my hard work, that one time in one of those foreign cities when I made an appearance, I overheard someone comment that how boring I was. And probably very shallow. I threw in that part. They didn't come to them. Boring, shallow. I keep telling you it's all an act. I don't mean being boring and shallow. It's an act trying not to be. That's just a joke out there. Yeah, I know it doesn't make any sense, but trust me, it was a joke. It's nice to turn the page, see, on a joke. We just leave it at that. From a more dimensionally complex view, let's get a little bit out of the city even with our discussion. From a view that would be more dimensionally complex, it could be said that the real study of man is the study of surfaces. Now, if someone, probably somewhere in the long yellow circuit written history of man, I bet there's been, life has had at least one little smart-aleck social critic somewhere try to accuse philosophers of the day, or maybe psychiatry or psychology nowadays, that they've never gotten into the real depths of man. They're right. But, don't laugh yet, but. The critics that would say that, I hate to be critical, they're wrong. Not that they're not right about the possibility that they think they observed, but they're wrong to think that something is amiss. Because I just started out stating a new axiom for you, that the real study of man, looked at from a more complex view, just man as is, not you folks, but looking back in the city at man. The real study of man is simply a survey of surfaces. But now to jump back into play, the part of the city kind of advocate, then we could say, well, something should be done about that, if that's true. If that has some validity, then that is certainly not what we need, not in this day and time. Are you sure? Looked at from the more complex view, back into man as he is, and for me to say that the real study of man is simply a study of surfaces, what could be more important than that? What else? Again, I repeat, now I'm not talking about you doing it. I'm talking about them dealing with themselves and you looking at it from an outside city view. Back in the city, what else is possible in an unfinished 3D world? What else are you going to study? I knew we were rolling along too good. Why else, for among other reasons, has humanity come up with all of these? Now, you people out there that may be getting this early, you just got to follow along. Why else has life made such large segments of humanity, especially segments that are historically perceived to be very intelligent, perceptive, insightful. Why has it had such large segments continually throughout history talk about, believe that they are now discovering and dealing with greater and greater depths in man? Such as, it started off, I'll just give a rough history. It started off the idea, we could call it religiously, spiritually, mythologically, that man has, he's not just what he appears to be, but man has an inner life, a soul. I don't know what a soul is. In most places now in our part of the world, it's kind of a passé notion. But it was a belief in a soul. And then there's a whole spectrum, I'm just making crudely, into that to now man's subconscious. Of course, you could look at the beginning of all recorded history was when in fact man first began to have consciousness, that is, apparently have some depth, that is, apparently had an inner life, that he was not simply his behavior, which is all, I'm pushing it in the 4D world, but if you're following this, it's not self-evident, but all of this is coeval. Not in a 3D sense. It didn't happen of having a line of time running this way and then a vertical line and saying all these things happen like that. It's not like that. It'd be more like a sphere. And a sphere is a sphere. And if it's floating out there in time, no matter how you look at it, it's still there. It's all there. So this did not happen vertically in a horizontal line of time. But it's like this. Man had no inner life until he could talk about it. And when he talked about it, he apparently then had an inner life. But before he talked about it, let's say that there they sit around, our hoary progenitors sitting around in caves, and you didn't think about the guy next to you. He was either behaving, that is, in action, or he wasn't in action. If he wasn't in action, at least you didn't have to worry he was going to hit you. And if you weren't in action, what was there to think about? Since you couldn't think anyway, you were either acting or you were at rest. We got to turn the tape. What I keep referring to for the time being as in the city, 3D reality, being at least a fairly easily observable, relatively speaking, fact that there is at all times going on a 4D existence for man, of time being a seamless, a non-stop, a pool from which all apparent action, all inaction, all apparent good, all apparent bad, is being continually drawn from. That it is a backdrop from which you cannot escape. It is a backdrop. It is another dimension. But to start off, again, to try and give you some notion of it, it is a kind of backdrop against which, if you had a continuing awareness, almost all of the unanswerable questions that man whines about would be fucking answered. You would have no question about why do other people act like I don't act. You ask that right that second. But if you had a continuing time awareness, you would realize the very thing that you just accused other people of doing, you've done. But you wouldn't recognize it. There's no proof. I don't have to prove it. If you had a kind of continuing time awareness, you have suddenly got, as I keep hinting to you, hint, hint, hint. You don't have to wait for some kind of great metaphysical day to come. You don't have to wait to hear voices from the heavens. It's that you look around and there's been at least 1/4 of everything you've ever seen, ever heard, ever thought, ever felt. All of life as you know it, no matter how educated you are, no matter what a world traveler you've been. There was 1/4 of it that's been cut off, been cut out, and you never saw it, and it was there. So to worry about whether you're ever going to see the gods in person or Martians in person, Jesus, believe me, you will be absolutely astounded to look around and think, hell, I've never even seen my mother in person. I've never seen me in person. I hadn't seen anything in person. All right, that is, to bring you back up before we stop the tape, of me pointing out that although it may sound as though it is less than totally desirable for me to say that the real study of man is simply a study of surfaces, is back in the city, what else is there? What do they expect if they understood any of this? When you're dealing with a reality that is always 1/4 short, they should be thankful that they got surfaces to deal with. But also I was trying to get you to see the way life operates again in a certain way, that some of you can begin to feel it. It's not me pointing out some flaw, and it's not me criticizing life to say that man doesn't have a soul. As people talk about it, man doesn't have a soul. As they talk about his unconscious mind, he doesn't have one. It's not my opinion against Freud or my opinion against the Old Testament authors. As you can feel that, once you begin to see it, you go, I know what they're talking about. I know what they thought they meant. But it's like, that then you got 4 eyes, and you realize everybody's had 3 eyes, and that's the best they could do. But notice life keeps making man, all the way back from the beginning, at least in the Western world, of, I guess, the Odyssey or the Iliad, that a slow progression, or I guess it seems speeded up to us now, looking historically from the city, of the recollection of man just being his behavior, that so-and-so did so-and-so. He killed so-and-so, and then he took his wife, and then he went somewhere else and he killed so-and-so. And then gradually, the pieces are left. It seems as though the writers tried to describe, well, he killed so-and-so, and then he walked off by the campfire by himself, and he looked kind of moody. Up until then, it was behavior. They just said, King so-and-so went over and killed other king so-and-so, and took his wife. End of story. Or end of chapter. Next chapter, the king's son, the dead king's son, comes and killed our king. And not only took his wife, took my wife, and everybody else's wife. But then it got into, he killed the man and looked moody. And it's like 50 years, and then 50 years later, it's like it got into, King so-and-so killed King so-and-so, and walked off, and appeared to be in a pensive mood, and then called me over and says, let's talk about what I just did. Then you got city life. Then you got the yellow circuit going. Then from our viewpoint, in a certain strange way, you got the end. Of course, you got the beginning. But it makes man believe continually, just ordinary man in the city, that not only is man developing more and more depth from a crude creature that just used to behave, but now he thinks about his behavior. He has morality. He has philosophy. He has standards of conduct. Not only that, but he knows about it, and he can describe it. But once your consciousness, once you begin to be a little more complex, outside the limits of 3D consciousness, you will see that in a real sense, all of that has been a facade. That if man started out at the crudest level, if man was just an okay man like you see in cartoons, let's just say that, and we said that his depth, that is anything other than his behavior, what you saw, that you saw this guy, seemed to be he's a caveman down the road, you've seen him once or twice, the only thing you know about him is what you see him do. A man is what he does. You can't think about it, you see what he does. Your knowledge of him is his behavior. All right, if we said that was man's depth back then. All right, now it seems as though man's depth is what? We now have his unconscious mapped, and Freud wrote books, and people after Freud about how to interpret dreams. And that you are what you are because of your environment of the last 40 years. Talking about deep and wide, very complex. Here's what I'm telling you. Not as theory, and not because I say so. Some of you already begin to sense this. If man back in the caveman days was that deep, then man today is that deep. Except any right-thinking person. I mean, you understand how foolish that is for me to say that. Back in the city, any intelligent person would just laugh me off the stage. That Jesus, if you believe that, you're dumber than I ever imagined. You're really crazy. The real study, from a more complex view, the real study of man is simply a study of surfaces. What else is important in the city? What else is important to life based upon the purposes that man serves, if you could see it? And what else is necessary? What else is possible if you're dealing with a less than complete reality? You're dealing with an unfinished view. You're dealing with, as they call it in the city, reality as they see it, and the reality as they see it about themselves is all unfinished. It's always at least 1/4 short. I repeat, to think that dealing with surfaces is less than fully adequate, they should be happy. They just barely got that. And of course I say they, all you got to do is look into you at your regular level of consciousness. That's all you've ever got. That's all that was possible. And yet you believed otherwise. You believed otherwise, that you wish you could afford analysis, or you thought maybe someday you'd find some great spiritual guru or some great philosophical teacher, and he would, in some way, maybe over a period, it might take a few months, who the hell knows, but because it's such a complex matter, to gradually unfold the very complex nature of man. You're dealing with surfaces. And some of you begin to get glimpses. I just perhaps never put it, or you never heard me put it this way. The whole idea about know thyself. Study thyself. Go to foreign land so that you can study yourself. Go talk to new people so that you can study yourself. Get some new books so that you can study yourself. And if you get a glimpse of what you are, I don't have to tell you anymore to go in the mirror every morning and laugh and go. Of course, that was pretty superficial. Is to be able to go into the mirror and to see your depths. Of what your depths are and what they've always been. All of your depths looking back at you. That's the joke, not the way you look. It's not the way you look. It's what you believe. That's what's funny. Something else, let me point out. In the city, the ordinary level of consciousness, people cannot learn from the pregnantly obvious. The obvious, they cannot learn from it. Which, of course, a real revolutionist must and does. But they cannot learn from the obvious, also because it is always at least 1/4 short. And if I use those kind of terms, and I'm sure along the way somebody back in the city throughout history has used that kind of observation, because again they would be saying almost, wait a minute, you cannot go by the appearances of things. That is superficial judgment. You can't study humanity just on what appears to be obvious. The tacit part of that sense is, if that was true, hell, everybody already know everything. And obviously they don't. So the flaw's got to be there for me to say that you should be learning from the obvious, or the real revolutionist. No. Well, so-and-so treated me such and such way. I think I'll just whip his ass. I think I'll never speak to her again. I'll leave this whole situation. Oh, no, wait. No, wait, you're too intelligent for that. No, you're just dealing with the obvious. Well, the person cheated me. If you had to talk about it all. The person cheated me. Yeah, but wait a minute. I know some things about his childhood that you don't. Well, boy, let me make a sandwich and sit down. I could learn from this. They will not learn from the obvious. But people say, well, I know something about myself, and the main thing I know, I guess, from all my reading is how little I actually know about me. How little there is to know about you. That's what's astounding. And yet all of humanity that thinks in such ways, all intelligent humanity, including you, believes otherwise. When I say believes, it's not something you were taught, it's not something you acquired. Life has done it. That I know so little about me. But there's so little to know. Once you know how to do it, all you kind of do is go, and you turn and you look and you go, oh, there it is. And if I hadn't already made you laugh, once you reach that point, you turn around and go, oh, no. What you want to say is not how obvious. And then you remember that I told you, ordinary people cannot learn from what's obvious. They can absolutely discount it. And it's not a cultural flaw, it is not an intellectual flaw. It is part, again, of the kind of coup de maître that life uses on humanity, that, the obvious, the superficial, is just that, superficial, which is synonymous, in a sense. One of the definitions of the word superficial, I hadn't looked it up lately, but the connotation, at least, of superficial is shallow, meaningless, or not as it appears to be, has no real foundation. What has more foundation than the surface? What's the first thing you get to in the 3D world, in the object? It's the surface. No. Well, that feels nice. I guess that's enamel, and it feels like it's a nice piece of wood. but I want to know what's going on down at molecular level. This won't do me. You go buy cars, you take up with the opposite sex. Men don't grab women in the parts they like and go, well, that ain't bad. But I wonder how her cellular structure looks inside. Who the hell cares? Who cares about the car, the way it looks, or a painting? Well, what kind of pigments are in that? You know, it is only the revolutionist. It's only somebody who understands the flawed nature, just the natural, but the naturally flawed nature of reality as consciousness sees it, they can learn from the obvious. Whereas you notice, it's as though life took everybody at one time, before all of humanity was born. It's put into the DNA chain. It's as though life took the original, the few little DNA cells that we could imagine was the progenitor of all of us, everyone on this planet, and right there at one time, just when the little cells were first starting, went, hey, look! And everybody looked, and that was it. And since then, somebody like me, if I was so foolish to say, look, don't worry about the great depth of things. Don't worry that you're only seeing the real thin superficial side. That's all there is. It's already in the cells that when that kind of information, if it just accidentally came out, it's everybody's cells hears, hey, look, and everybody looks, that this cannot be true. The obvious is simply that, obvious. The superficial is that. Superficial. No, look. I guess some of these jokes I was about to make gets dangerous for you people just showing up, but I was going to say, it's a joke. You got to know how to do this. But after all the kind of stuff I talk about like just then, how about this? What if it turned out that I'm wrong? Think of all the time I hadn't wasted. If it's scaring any of you people at other times other places on tape, that's just a joke, because I have wasted as much time as the rest of you. Or else I couldn't tell you about this. In other words, I couldn't talk to you about the way you feel and the way you think if I didn't know something about it. So, generally speaking, I have wasted as much time as you have. I just did it faster. In a sense, also, let me say, ordinary people, back in the city, people operate on a kind of automatic pilot, directed by, once you begin to see it, it's as good a phrase as any, as crude as it sounds, they are directed by, in the city, biological necessities. While, again the difference, out in the bushes with the real revolutionist is being guided by an awareness of certain kinds of biological possibilities. There are certain biological possibilities, and by certain I really mean that there are certain time and literally physical limits available in one person's lifetime. That is your lifetime. Speaking, using you now individually as being this real revolutionist I was speaking of, that everybody in the city, you, me, and everybody at city level is guided by, directed by biological necessities. That's it. But the difference, once you begin to smell and to find and to see and to feel your way beyond just the 3D limits, the difference then becomes, and I'm not going to go into this much further tonight, but it's like a new kind of non-native internal guidance. It's personal with you, that the guidance is then through an awareness of certain biological possibilities. Not theoretical, although that could be of some interest because I talk about that some, whether you notice it or not. but it becomes practically what you can do that are biological possibilities outside of what is necessary for you to live. What's been necessary for you to live, you don't need a telescope. You don't need a microscope. You need the great, extensive survey and study of surfaces. What you've done is what you had to do. That is the biological necessities. There are certain, for a few people, there are certain biological possibilities of which one might become aware. What else do you think all this is about? Certain biological possibilities. And if you think otherwise, if you think it's spiritual, if you think it's metaphysical, if you think it's new age, old age, middle age, if you think it's even pinstriped or shark-skinned age, you're wrong. I just told you what it was. It is certain biological possibilities. They're not in conflict with the biological necessities. It's why I'm so disappointing that you don't hear attacks on life. It's why I can't agree with you, that is life in the city, that things are winding down. There may be some small hope, but by and large, we're probably done for. There are certain biological possibilities not in conflict, not at odds with, not limited to the present biological necessities. It's around the corner. Notice I said around the corner, not around the bend. That's for any of you people whose hobby used to be being nuts, rubbing goofy dust in your hair. One more thing from last time. If you recall, me talking about self-protection, a certain kind of use of aggression, which I guess if any people seen this tape some other time, some other place, and this is your first, anywhere from your first to I'd say about your 110th tape you've seen, I guess you ought to put your fingers in your ears. And be sure and don't see the last tape, the one you've already seen, be sure and don't see that one. The kind of self-protection, and I purposefully, last time, used such terms, such description, I was saying it was a kind of controlled, willful hatred that was even beyond words. And I knew exactly what I was saying, and I did it on purpose. Hatred. All right. You've had, what's 2 days? 48 hours? 48, 96 hours? You've had 2 days. Now let me make C-O-N-T : continuation of last time. By me saying hatred last time, even willful and controlled, the reality of what I mean is not hatred that is known by any stripe or of any variety known to ordinary consciousness. There is no word for it. That's why I went ahead and used hatred, because that was about as hateful a word as the other synonyms that I could, believe it or not, have conjured up even on the spot. But that sounds to city ears to be the most distasteful. So, now that you've had 96 hours, anyone who found themselves distasteful, this willful kind of controlled hatred actually comes from around the corner itself. And even though there's still no word for it, absolutely none in any language, no description for this, I'm going to expand and give you a little way out and a little pointing to where you can get outside this hatred. It would be more like a kind of perfected hatred. No, it would be more like a perfected sovereignty over your hatred. No, it would be more like a kind of perfected control over your wrath. No, it would be more like a kind of perfected dominion over your controlled, directed malevolence. This is all still simply an expansion of me calling it willful and controlled hatred. Because if it's willful and controlled, it's not hatred. It is a perfected form, though. It is a completed form. Since, as I was trying to get you to ponder on your own from last time, of me saying, why is hatred so rampant? Why is aggression and hostility amongst man just the nature of man, the history of man? Why is it like that? And at the same time, it's like half the people are killing half the other people, and half the other people being killed are hollering out, we got to do something about hatred. It's always been that way. And I ask you, what's going on? Why has life produced this thing it calls hatred and aggression and anger and all of its manifestations? Why has it done that? And it obviously uses it. If you can see just a glimpse every now and then, it serves a purpose, like everything. But why has it done that and then still continually, roundly denounce it? Is it because that hatred really is so inefficient, so terrible? Or is it because it's too efficient? Now, to bring you up to what I was using tonight, can you hear anything of me saying that is a kind of perfected anger? Not ordinary anger by any means, by any means. But since there is no term, at least write it down or remember it if you ever want to work on this. It's a kind of perfected anger. It's complete. It's not 3/4. It's perfected. And as I played my little game about no, and I kept changing a little bit and adding on to it, you could also see it not as just perfected anger, but as perfected sovereignty over perfected anger. Perfected dominion over controlled, self-serving malevolence that hurts no one and helps everyone. That is, because you're it. Those that would, just without them being able to help it, those that apparently are the source of any irritation, the source of making you angry, cannot help you. When it comes down to it, who are you going to dance with in life? Except me. Anybody else? Somebody's going to step on your foot. But I am the closest thing, in this instance, to a benign medium, to a benign dancer. But yes, I do lead. Always going to lead. But you got nobody else to dance with. It's perfection. Even though it does interfere. Well, that's right. They took the Dukes of Hazzard off. Well, I was going to say even with bowling gone to go up to 3 nights a week, but that's right. And the A-team. Well, that's right. I got 2 more free nights. Okay, no problem. I had another good question from last time that I was going to use tonight, but the person who wrote the question, it turns out, is not here again. So I'm going to say it one more time. If the person doesn't show up, I'll answer the damn question. It needs to be responded to. I'll answer it anyway. But before we really leave, I guess in a little small way that some people, especially first around this, can really get annoyed, and you can still feel it in yourself, some of you people have been around, that this thing didn't have a name. You know, lately I call it this or the revolution, and I wink and I make jokes, and you know it ain't a revolution in any ordinary sense. And to say this, like in quotation marks with a capital T, that's, you got to admit, that's got it down to almost a noun nib. There's almost nothing. Let's call it this. But at any rate, and of course, a couple of weeks back I joked around and put up the initials and referred to it as whatever the hell this is. Several people like that. I even got notes from out of town that now 2 or 3 times in the last since I've done that, people has used it in their note to me. Those initials of W-E, whatever it was. That they've already picked it up. They enjoyed it so much. At any rate, there is another one. I started to let Kairoot take this over. And it's not a name in the sense that, of course, in the city, they think of a name of something being. But there is, every now and then I think of names. We're not going to use it. For one thing, it's too long to fit up, on the sign out in front of our church. But Well. All right. The name. At times on the floor above, I hear the sounds of strangers dancing. Arrivederci.